Hello and welcome to And It's Live, the history of the Premier League. I'm Martin Ramsey, your host, and it is the summer of 1998, a World Cup summer, a beautiful summer if you were at university and doing fuck all but watching football and lounging around as I was. David Edgar, how are we this fine sunny evening?
Was that your first year at university? Because I was at university too, and I'm
summer after, so it was the end of first year.
End of first year, yeah, because I was thinking I would be at the end of my third year because I graduated in '99. But you probably went early because you were a wee spod, whereas I stuck about in school to
absolute waste of fucking 6 years.
Idiot. No, I hung about my academy until they kicked me out so that I could, because I got all the qualifications I needed in fifth year and dossed about in 6 years, which was an ideal preparation for university, actually. But yes, no, it was a wonderful summer. I still remember the summer of '98, Scotland, Brazil, watching in the late and much lamented Glasgow bar Fookies, which would have been burnt down in the recent fire, actually, because it was right on the corner of Union Street. But the whole city was out to watch that game. Great tournament, fondly remembered. A good time for our club, but more importantly, with regards to the show, an excellent time for the EPL.
Bubbling up very nicely. Adam, how are you doing?
Fine. I was 12, and I wasn't listening to whatever you were talking about there because I was 12.
Well, you missed out. It's basically they just
being 12 in Scotland didn't necessarily stop you drinking.
A seasoned bevier at 12 years old in Glasgow.
I think I went from milk to hooch, basically, so you're probably...
I've said this in just about every show I've ever been on, slightly adjacent to the World Cup of '98. If Ronaldo goes to bed and gets up perfectly fine, we have a phenomenal final, and I think without doubt, underlined in bold, in caps, in italics if you want, the greatest World Cup. I think it was just superb. A collection of players who were just about fit enough to be present and be at their best after a club season. Not sure we see that after Euro 2000, to be honest. And I just loved it. Some might say no shocks in Croatia semi-final is maybe that. I'm very much the overdog. I'm very much Team Goliath when it comes to sport, to be honest. But it was almost perfect, and such a shame the final was a non-event. It didn't take place. It didn't really count. Counted for France, of course. And, talking about the Premier League and Emmanuel Petit putting the cherry on top of the cake with that third goal. And, it was in France, won by France. Everything, guys, just underlining that Arsenal are right. They're on the right track. And sky's the limit, David.
100%. What better representation of the strides that Arsenal have made there's Emmanuel Petit going and scoring in a World Cup final. I think, to your point about the World Cup, as well as that, if you like, that tiredness factor which comes in, I think it's actually related to another point. I think that's the last World Cup where the World Cup was seen as the pinnacle. And that may be a little controversial and people can debate. But the Champions League, after this, it's on its way by this point. But now everyone agrees the ultimate testing ground for footballers, elite footballers, is what have you done in the Champions League? And I think this World Cup was the last. That's the way we used to see it. And there is Arsenal's midfield dynamo, scoring a goal in a World Cup final against Brazil. And a much fancied Brazil, although, as you said, Martin, a bit of a ghost of a Brazil side that night. We all know, well, we don't know really what happened with Ronaldo, but we all know the Ronaldo who showed up was not there. He was there in body, but certainly not in spirit. And yeah, Arsenal just looked like they had discovered the secret of alchemy here, because they've brought in this manager who's got the strange background compared to most hires of this era. They've brought in players who weren't very well known, and they've moulded them into this amazing side that's got the best of the old school Arsenal. It's still got the back line. It's still got that defensive capability. But there's so much exciting attacking talent. Remember, France didn't even take an Elka, which I think would have been really interesting if they had. And you just felt we were at the beginning of something really special. But I think another thing, you knew Manchester United would roar back. Manchester United were not going to take this lying down. They were going to push on. They had the stadium, and they wanted to. So the summer was super exciting because what you had were two very, very good sides, and only one of them can win. So the upcoming season looked incredibly dramatic, and little did we know in that summer that we were going to get an all-timer.
Sure. Well, Adam, tactically from that World Cup, how long does it take anything from what France were doing maybe to flow in? Does it take Henri to come, and that is, 18 months hence, because he goes to Juventus in the summer of 99, does not enjoy himself there and ends up in Arsenal just a few months later? Or is Wenger, how close are Wenger's Arsenal in the summer of 98 to Amy Jacquet's France?
Yeah, I think there's the elements of it. Obviously, with the players, I would say the French defense is more modern than the Arsenal defense in that sense. As we mentioned, it is still a bit of a bolt on. I always think that club football evolution of tactics influences international football rather than the other way around. Maybe that was the case back in the 50s, 60s, with Hungary and Catenaccio and all that sort of stuff. Maybe that had flipped around a little bit, but I agree that this was when the pinnacle moved from world to Europe, really, in terms of the Champions League. So I don't think it's quite there yet. I think your point about Henri is the where I would pin it. I think for me, maybe it's just someone of my age. Euro 96 felt like England or British football sort of shedding its 80s image, but this one felt like a proper modernization of Europe, really. I think, or as that's what I would just focus on. I just felt like there was so much colour. I know 94 World Cup, there was a lot of colour, but in terms of like the occasion and all that sort of stuff, but it just felt like this was the one where it was a lot more in your face. And the point about Petit, I think, is great, because we were talking a couple of years before that you're getting players coming in that are maybe feeling like they're doing you a favour, or they're ending their career, or it's a retirement home, or that type of thing. But let's be honest, central midfielders are not defensive midfielders. Sorry, are not in vogue at this point. So for it to have trickled down so far to central midfielders, the greatest central midfielders currently playing in the Premier League, and then doing those things on the global stage, I think shows how rapid the change was. We spoke about it from 92 to 95, say. I think it's just as big a gap between 95 and 98 for sure. And this is where I would definitely bookend. I think I probably said this a couple of times, but I would definitely bookend this now as like the proper modern era, or the second evolution coming up. Yeah.
Well, one thing I find really interesting is that if you look at Philippe Lam, when Pep Guardiola turns him into a midfielder, and people say, wow, this is incredible. Philippe Lam, we've known him as a defender for all these years. Reece James at Chelsea, I think, is a good recent example of it as well. Wenger does this with Petit. Petit's a left back. And I know that because our club, Rangers, tried to sign him that summer as a left back. He goes to Arsenal, and Wenger says, by the way, I don't see you as a full back. I see you as a defensive midfielder. He doesn't really get the credit for that, Adam, does he? And yet, it's 15 years ahead of the game.
You're on mute, Adam.
Sorry. I think it is just that globalization, saturation, whatever you want to call it, that we have now that maybe there wasn't then. Where as we've dug through some of these seasons, or like looking at Hoddle at Chelsea, or some of the deep dives we did on the Champions League shows for Kiev, for example, there's things happening in little pockets everywhere that unfortunately isn't being spoken about a great deal, and I think this probably falls into that. If we're not so far away from Arsene Who, I don't know if I don't know if even the most ardent of Arsenal fans or journalists would be scouring old copies of L'Equipe to see where Emmanuel Petit played.
No, you're right. You're right.
I think it's one of those things that I think hasn't really entered the public consciousness, whereas now you could literally Google that and it would come up. So yeah.
Nobody had seen Emmanuel Petit playing left back in this country, and you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. So he just arrives and he plays centre midfielder, and most people are probably aware that of him as a centre midfielder.
Why would they not play? Yeah, it's just that thing, isn't it? Why would they not play centre midfielder?
Well, once you see him in there, you do wonder why nobody noticed before. But that was Wenger's great genius at this time. He does get the credit for Thierry Henry, I suppose, but I think he also deserves, because he had this ability to not only see a player but see his strengths, and sometimes the players didn't. Petit was like, "No, I'm not. Why are you buying me then? If you want to, if you don't want a left back, you want a central midfielder." But Wenger knew, and obviously got him playing in that way. And I mean, what is anyone going to ever? We're going to talk about a remarkable year for a group of players, but signing for Arsenal, the double, and the World Cup. That's a pretty significant personal treble, I would say, and I don't know if many could really say that they've achieved
good
that.
Few months, isn't it? Yeah, good few months for a few of those lads. Arsenal don't do a lot this summer. Saying goodbye to a few players. David Platt, in particular, saying goodbye to football. Ian Wright moving on to West Ham. There are a few clubs in him as he kind of clings on, really making the most of a career in which he was a late starter, I suppose. Wenger wanted a replacement, obviously, wanted Kluivert, couldn't get him, wanted Henry early. I think maybe wages were a bit of a problem for Arsenal at that point in time. So he doesn't do an awful lot, Adam. It's look to the future, maybe. Nelson Vivas comes in, and a young Freddie Ljungberg comes in. Both strike me as cover. Certainly Vivas would be a kind of fullback cover. But there aren't many holes in this Arsenal team that you need to fill, are there?
Not really, to be honest. Richard Hughes left them as well. What a strange career. Now sporting director of Liverpool, obviously. But before he was at Arsenal's youth teams, he was at Atalanta's youth team as well, because he grew up in Italy. That's a very bizarre journey to go from Glasgow to Bergamo to Arsenal to Bournemouth to Portsmouth, and now Liverpool sporting director.
Before he became a sporting director, he used to do commentary on Serie A games for BT, as it was, and TNT now, but in perfectly fluent and beautifully pronounced Italian.
Yeah, I'm going to assume one of his parents, I assume maybe his mother, is from there. But yeah, but no, they didn't have to. They didn't have to do very much. Some of the signings for me, again, benefit of hindsight, and everyone's an expert. Feels like we see some of these signings 10 years later as well, in terms of I'm trying to pull some rabbits out of the hat, like I've done with your Vieiras and your Anelkas, and there's a bit of a mixed bunch for every Freddie Ljungberg and Wanka Kanu.
There's absolutely,
Grondin and Diawara. So yeah, I mean, it's that eternal thing. Do you stick or do you twist? For me, I think it always has the benefit of hindsight. It always has the benefit of hindsight, but we've got the benefit of hindsight. I should say that you're thinking, oh well, if they had done something else in this window, if they had managed to, I mean, they did not.
You can upset the apple cart though, Adam. You know what I mean? Which is clubs can do too much. Kanu comes in the winter, obviously, because they have right. Although he's very much at the end of his career. He's still chipped in, and you still need that kind of player who can do that. Absolutely.
Ironically, this season is where they struggled with scoring goals. So it's just one of those, again, hindsight. Kanu does come in for sure, but can you push the boat out a little bit and go that extra mile, because it's a very tight title race, as we know. And the fact he didn't break 60 goals in the league probably suggests that they could have, but again, hindsight.
Yeah. Manchester United then stung by defeat, getting caught. And for a lot of these young players, the first time they'd really properly tasted that. And, we looked at their injuries, David and I, last week. But it is important to probably point out, Cantona had obviously left. Keane played, 9 games that season before being injured, so he's pretty much out for the majority of that season. Palliser missed important games, Schmeichel missed important games, Steve Bruce is gone, Giggs missed important games. Maybe somewhere in the summer of '98, Alan Hansen allowed himself a wry smile at just with the benefit of experience when things start to get a bit tight in a title race. I think it's clear, boys, that Alex Ferguson recognised the need for some quality in the door, either end of the pitch. And Jaap Stam, Adam, was just a Manchester United player, right, from PSV, just fitted the bill, looked the part, and would pay dividend.
Yeah, he totally would. I think you're right, particularly with that sort of crossing over, as you mentioned. This was a key signing, and then up front, obviously, as well, with Dwight Yorke coming in. I think those two, to me, felt right. You're bringing in 2 players at the peak of their powers. Your new sort of cornerstone of your defence, and then a little bit more firepower up front. Was good. Midfield, I always felt was really strong anyway throughout this decade and into the next for sure. So yeah, I can understand that, but I do think they did what they had to do here. And obviously, again, there are some misses within that as well. You can't get everything right, but I think if that was their top 2 targets and their top 2 aims, then I agreed with it, and it proves right.
Dwight Yorke eventually went, David. John Gregory, I think it's fair to say, less than happy. In any press conference, said, look, he came to me 2 weeks ago and said, I want to go to Manchester United, I don't want to play for Aston Villa. If I had a gun at the time, I probably would have shot him. Not sure that's going to appear on any Sky Sports News tickers any time soon again, that kind of language. But, we'll talk about what Villa did with that. I think some sensible purchases, and maybe got a kind of more balanced squad. But Yorke did provide, we didn't know just how superb he would connect with Andy Cole, but just giving a bit of devilment, a bit of something extra, a bit of a crackerjack in those forward lines. And then you've got 4 very different forward options that you can use to complement, and as we'd see, to great effect. But United probably did need a bit of that, a bit of swagger, a bit of personality that they missed with Cantona.
Yeah, you mentioned that Jaap Stam just fits in straight away as a Manchester United player. So does Dwight Yorke in a different way. Dwight Yorke believes that he should be playing for the biggest club in the country, and he believes that he should be a star at the biggest club in the country. And you need players like that. You mentioned there some of the players that they were missing the previous year. That's a lot of aura out of your side. No matter what anyone says about, that it comes down to on the pitch and whatnot. The personality in football is a thing, and you've lost Cantona, Keane, Schmeichel for large parts of the season. That's 3 huge characters when the going gets tough. And Dwight Yorke in a different way provides that as well. I must admit, at the time, I thought it was a lot, 12.6 million. It was a lot back then. And I thought it was a lot for Dwight Yorke. But then I looked at the front 4 that they had, and like you, I didn't know he would link up as well as he does with Cole. But it's exactly what you said there. you've got 4 different types of strikers, yet you can see how various combinations of them will dovetail. And that is quite scary. You've got 4 superb footballers. I mean, that's the thing, right? They are 4 top-class players. But you could see, right, okay, I can see why, Yorke might work with Cole, but I can see why Yorke could work with Sheringham, and I can see how, Solskjaer off the bench, etc. It was exciting, and it looked like a purchase that was being made to say, right, we're not messing about this season. Right, we are going for it. It's big money. It's a lot of money for him and Jaap Stam. But they weren't messing around. They'd identified the players they wanted. They went and got them. And I understand, John Gregory, but I think you do have to be realistic in these situations. Especially, it's difficult now, but when Manchester United came calling back then, the player was going to go. It was just a question of how much you could wring out of them. There was no way to avoid it. It's a little bit different now because every club in England has money if you're in the Premier League, and wages aren't the head turning thing that they maybe previously were. But you in this era, you're not going to hold on to them. They are so glamorous. They are outrageously glamorous, and they are. It's a good time to join because you're not joining a team that's just won everything. You're joining a team that's hungry and looking to get it back. And I love, the infamous story, day one. The one player I think that Roy Keane ever looked up to was Cantona, famously. And day one at training, Dwight Yorke says he lashed the ball at me from about 4 yards as hard as he could, and it hit me. And I was like, what are you doing? And he went, Eric Cantona would have trapped that, and walked away. And it was a reminder to him of the club he joined and the standards that he would need to set. I think that the interpersonal relationship with him and Andy Cole, you could see it on the pitch. You could actually see it on the pitch that here were 2 guys that were in sync, I think, as people, but then they were in sync as a combination. You don't have to be, because I think Sheringham and Cole was actually a pretty good combo, and they certainly weren't in sync as people. But I just thought that amount of firepower, they were going to take some stopping if they kept everybody fit, because, as I say, that 4, it isn't just the fact that they're all really good players. It's the fact that they're all differently good. United are going to come at you from so many angles this season. And of course they do. Well, they score. They always score. Well, little wonder when you've got this amount of talent on your side.
I think allied to the fact as well for me that there's only 2 players that score more than 6 league goals for Arsenal this season. So it's the opposite. Bergkamp gets 12 and Anelka gets 17. And then Overmars is and Kanu, actually, who comes halfway through our 6 along with Parlour. So it just felt like, for me, as much as Arsenal were great the season before, it felt like that's a lot of firepower United are racking up now.
Does the World Cup have an effect on Arsenal throughout the season? Because it's never something I've seen that, but you have reached these highs, and sometimes when you reach the top of the mountain, it's inevitable that some people will go, do you know what, I'm going to have a wee rest here. And you do wonder, and they're playing all the way through it, of course.
I think, I'm a big believer in it. There's nothing to believe. It happens. We've seen it happen. I'm always concerned with teams that have maybe got somewhere too soon, and they might just become sated by that. And we'll get to it over the course of the next few weeks. But I think, again, our binary narrative being this is glory for Manchester United, everyone else is rubbish. For Arsenal to get so close to another double, basically, for being honest, a Bergkamp penalty away from another double, probably. Someone who you would put your house on in normal circumstances. To do that again, given the World Cup thing for quite a few of those players, I think that's huge to even get that far. The big disappointment, which we will touch, but we touched on it in the main event, was Europe and the Champions League. Obviously, that did not go well in their temporary accommodation and all that. So, but no, I think it's a valid point. Many people enjoyed the World Cup, not necessarily Mr. David Beckham, Esquire, who famously had his tournament ended earlier than anticipated. It's hard to really put into words the reaction to this story by the time the season came about. Again, the need to blame the single person, even the fact that England were actually better after he was sent off, and really their fate was sewn by not holding on to a draw against Romania. And if they'd won that group, I think there's a very, very different history in that particular tournament. But that's just not how it works. And, Alex Ferguson was very much out to bat, as you would imagine. It was utter hysteria, not just boos, which that's just part of football, but, effigies being burnt at Upton Park, if I remember. This is going to hang about for quite a wee while, which, of course, Adam, sets the narrative up so well for what eventually kind of transpires, not just for United that season, but then Beckham with England over the next 2 or 3, where he becomes, Mr. England and almost a national treasure. It's a remarkable turnaround.
It is, and I remember at the time as a 12-year-old thinking it's a little bit much, as far as I'm concerned. And it's funny how we now think that society 30 years on is really quick to burn the witch and get to these situations. It just goes to show it doesn't really matter how long ago it was. There's still that snap judgment. I was so surprised. I grew up not really as a Scotland fan, if I'm honest. It was Rangers first. I don't think I would necessarily correlate in my head Ali McCoist missing a chance in a Scotland shirt to what he would then do in a Rangers shirt at that point. It just never really, it just felt like a different thing. So the fact that petulance for sure from Beckham, but the fact that he was then vilified for so long. And I get, like you said, opposition fans can do this and can do that, but to the level it got to, I was stunned about it, I have to say. Even as a 12-year-old, and looking back, I'm even more stunned about it, I think, because it's just mad. Again, everyone has to have someone to blame, but you'd like to think, okay, you can have a summer to moan about it, but then when the Premier League starts, there's really there's no relevance to it.
I think it's telling where the media landscape is. It's just before this big internet explosion, where you're right. I mean, people are angry all the time, but they're angry in these little silos.
Yeah.
This is national news. This is national newspapers, when national newspapers used to matter a thing. And it is the national discourse. It is what football fans are talking about. And therefore, they're all whipped up by that. And after that sending off, there is no football for those fans until the Premier League kicks back off. So that's pent up, even more. And he wears skirts and all the other kind of societal mores that are part of this kind of conversation.
This is it, mate. This is it. They had been waiting to have a go. He's uppity, right? There was more than a hint of classism about this, but it's who does he think he is, striding about doing photo shoots and dating a pop star and being young and good looking and really talented and successful. It's his fault my life is shit. That comes to the fore dramatically. Watching from afar, and I was a Scotland fan, so I took a kind of schadenfreude pleasure in England being knocked out. Sorry to our English viewers, but I'm sure you understand. Scotland weren't pulling up any trees, it's fair to say, so you had to get it where you could. But I watched this from afar thinking this is outrageous. It's like, he got sent off and it was stupid and you can be angry at him, but it's done now. So what's the point of this? And two, there was a lot of also Manchester United, jealousy and hatred. There was a lot of that. There's definitely. If that's David Beckham or I don't know if it would have been as bad. But also, for newspapers, it gives you an excuse to stick David Beckham on the cover every day. Back in a time when a photograph of David Beckham on the front page will sell 100,000 extra newspapers. So they had an excuse every day. But the level of toxicity this was a football player who had done something stupid in a big football match, but that he was lambasted to a degree that I think was absolutely shocking. As I say, because we were outside that bubble, and to be honest, once the game was finished, that was it for us. As Scottish people watching, I thought it was outrageous when you're burning an effigy of someone, short of that person being a really vile criminal or a war criminal, then you need to take a long, hard look at yourself. But what happens in a situation like that is everybody wants to be the vilest, because once a certain level of anger is reached, if you don't top that, you see it on social media where it's a race to the bottom to I am the angriest, and therefore people have to continually come up with more and more and more disgusting sentiments. But for Beckham, if they hadn't got him on this, Martin, they were getting him on something else. It reminds me of the old line about Richard Nixon. They were out to get him, but he gave them things to get him with. And that's what Beckham did, unfortunately for him. But, yeah, I mean...
If Michael Owen kicks out at Diego Simeone in exactly the same stage of that match, given what he had just done in his youth...
He doesn't get as bad.
Not even close. The fall guy... In fact, I think pretty much for any other England player, the fall guy is Diego Simeone, because he has cheated and he has exaggerated and he has blown this thing up, even though you literally can't kick out at people, you'll get sent off. But that would have been the narrative for sure. Anyway, that's what Manchester United have to deal with. They'll have a sluggish start, but it might turn out all right. Plenty more transfers to talk about after the break. Welcome back to And It's Live, the history of the Premier League. We are in that beautiful summer of 1998. Adam, we have talked many times over the last few seasons on this show about how sexy Chelsea are, and they're getting sexier every summer. My word, they are busting down the doors of sexiness this particular summer. Pierluigi Casiraghi, loved him. Kind of first burst onto my scene anyway in the Italian 90s. He was a kind of young hope for Italy. Didn't really kind of make that mark. Someone who has made a mark in European football and world football is Marcel Desailly. Only 29, Marcel Desailly. Now more of a centre-back sweeper, certainly further back in the pitch than those kind of marauding Milan days and that 94 Champions League final. The very tidy Albert Ferrer, fullback. This is brilliant. And even though heartbreaking though it may have been for us, Brian Laudrup as well on a free. Mikel Forsell, one of the other frees, again, maybe one for the future. Off the back of that Cup Winners' Cup win, Adam, I'll be honest, doing the beginnings of preparation for this season, just a glance at the table, I was stunned. Just wasn't in my consciousness at all, or in my memory, how close Chelsea were to Arsenal, and effectively 4 or 5 points, I think, between the top three, and they absolutely are building something. But there's some absolute blockbuster signings in there, which they just seem to be doing every season at the moment.
Yeah, just racking them up. And yeah, I think we're definitely starting to see now this big four forming in there that obviously will go and dominate for quite a few seasons, dominate the narrative anyway. Yeah, very, very cosmopolitan again, like we've said so many times. Gustavo Poyet coming in the year before was one that I'd actually watched a bit of him at Zaragoza. That season that I just watched basically every Ronaldo game that was on on Sky. When he was at Barcelona, I think Poyet popped up a couple of times in those games, and he was someone that I knew from that league. I'd have to say I didn't expect him to be going to Chelsea. I didn't expect him to be quite as good as he was at Chelsea. I thought he was really good this season. They had a lot of firepower. Vialli still getting 20 odd appearances as well this season. Despite obviously being the manager, just really bursting with talent. I don't want to say they had the best squad, because I'm not sure that's really the case. But what they did have for sure is a lot of options and a lot of talent within there. Devastated that Brian Laudrup went. It was the worst kept secret in the world. I think I've said this before. Round about this time, I probably did favour Chelsea. I did move to Arsenal very quickly. I'm quite a populist like that, but I did favour Chelsea round about this time. So Laudrup going there was probably the best that I could have hoped for. Still sad to see that it never really worked out. And Desailly, yeah, there's not really much more we can say. I was really, really surprised as well when it's those age in these type of situations. I think is just so fascinating because a player can peak like Ronaldo, maybe when he's in his teens, even or early 20s, and then you've got player, and then they can burn out, as some do. We spoke about Michael Owen potentially, but then you've got some who just feel like they've been around forever and have been great.
That position though, Adam, that midfielder who's just taking a step back. Look at Houllier, right? I mean, a rampaging forward, goes deeper and deeper and deeper. Can great vision anyway, so can see a game. And it kind of doesn't matter. But David, Desailly seemed like Houllier, but young enough that at that stage, again, we're into veteran territory now, really. But at that stage, 28, 29, that's your peak. Still, people hanging on to this. So it certainly felt this isn't quite the retirement home, the last stop, the kind of farewell tour. Again, he's not the marauding midfielder charging around, but he's still easily one of the best two centre backs in the league immediately.
Absolutely. This is going to sound odd to people who follow Chelsea in the year of our Lord 2026, but it looked as though their plan was coming to fruition, which was they'd brought in players of a certain type and a certain level who had begat the next lot. And then they'd gone up a level each time they'd done it. You go from, as you say, Martin, the veterans who give you a bit of cachet. Now the Premier League is starting to get a little bit glamorous, and London is a draw. London is a draw for players in the same way that New York is one of those special cities that even if you don't know, if any of us got offered a move, do you want to go and stay in New York or Des Moines, Iowa? We're going to go to New York. And London has that sort of appeal. But these signings were, as you say, first of all, impossibly glamorous, right? I mean, really did seem like, it's a whole Carnaby Street, Fashion Centre, Chelsea, West End, all of that. But Desailly, I felt was a game-changing signing because he's a player that, in my opinion, walked into the Arsenal or the United side, certainly from the previous season. I thought he was that good. He's come in here and he does have, certainly at centre-back, you're thinking another 3-4 years there. But he's bringing with him experience. He's bringing with him leadership. He's bringing with somebody who has literally been over the course in the major competitions, Serie A, the strongest league in the world at the time, repeatedly. And he's bringing all of that to Chelsea. Then you add in some of the other exciting. I mean, Laudrup, we knew how capable he was. Casiraghi, I'd absolutely loved watching in Italy. And I felt he was, and injury obviously denies him at Chelsea. But everything about it looked like they were following a plan and they were building year upon year. And you just thought, right, they're going to make something happen here because they seem to know what they're doing, essentially. I think Chelsea fans under 30 might find that surprising to hear, but there was a time when Chelsea's recruitment planning and overall ambition was admired by those out with the game. I couldn't wait to see this Chelsea team this season. I thought it looked just super exciting. And you're right, it's actually better than it gets credit for.
I would maybe describe it as building for sure, but it sort of felt like they were bringing in building blocks quite a lot of the time, and maybe that is just what would become a modern football thing. Let's bring in all of these great players and someone can pull them together. Not sure it really. Ranieri probably gets quite close. He does get quite close in some quarters, but I think it's maybe a shame that all of these players probably didn't quite have a manager of the level of the other two. I think at this point, because that could have been really interesting. to see how that happened. So I definitely felt for sure they were building, and they were, for me, third comfortably this season. But I just wonder, as much as Houllier was a great player and Vialli was there as well, and then they moved to Ranieri, if they'd have been out there and maybe been a little bit more ambitious with their managerial appointments at this stage as they were with their players as well, then who knows what could have happened.
I mean, there's a lot of hope in Vialli, though, isn't there? I mean, this really is hindsight. There's a very cultured character, experienced player, intelligent kind of guy. He has won a European trophy
already, and
cup. I think, and a cup. No, I think maybe the Ranieri appointment is maybe a moment where they could have thought a bit bigger. They eventually do in a very different circumstance, obviously. But I think at this minute in time, they're backing a horse that most people think that's the future. There's the future of management. They are part of the future of management. Sure.
Yeah, maybe it's hindsight because of how the career went. But for me, it sort of felt like a player managery type thing that was. I didn't necessarily think he was going to go on and become a great manager or anything like that. That wasn't something that entered my head. But yeah, he did do well.
I think there was a conscious decision that Chelsea felt at this point they couldn't attract that very top level of manager, so they'll grow their own. Which we see we've seen it recently with Chelsea actually, and it spectacularly hasn't worked out. But I think there was a sense of these are people who've been brought into the club and then got to know the club, and then they have each of them been appointed, and it's worked because it's taken us on at each stage. And I think there was a sense of that we are prepared, almost in the way that Arsenal have done with Arteta. We are prepared to let this guy have a couple of years. And he'd already demonstrated the ability to win, to cross the line, to bring in trophies for them. Then, we know under Abramovich, Chelsea will decide what we'll do is we'll just hire every top manager in the world at some point for about 18 months. And it worked for them. So you can't complain about it. But at this point, I thought he looked fair. The other thing about it was we are still in the infancy of bringing in managers who've coached in other leagues. It's still early doors in this. Yes, Wenger, but there was also Christian Gross, etc. And I think that when they maybe looked down the Premier League at them, I don't think anyone was really jumping out at them to say, actually, you need to hire this guy. So I think that probably played a part in their thinking as well.
Yeah, I agree.
Adam, you mentioned the top four. It won't end up the top four this season, but there's certainly a big four, and that does include Liverpool. Something of a transitional season. This very odd. Transition's exactly it. Thanks, Roy Evans. Hang about, but we're going to try and do what Arsenal have done with their very cosmopolitan French manager. So we'll bring in Gerard Houllier, but we want you to manage together. Destined for failure. Roy Evans chucks it in November, and Adam, they don't really do much in the market of note this summer, and it transitions really it. They're not going to finish particularly high, and you're seeing they'll get rid of Jason McAteer halfway through the season. David James will go at the end of the season. Steven Gerrard arrives. That's his first season. So, and hanging over them all season is the fact that Steve McManaman is out of contract.
Yeah, very. I think I mentioned this a couple of weeks ago. Very strange, this joint appointment thing, and you can sort of see the logic we spoke about long about George Graham to Bruce Rioch to Arsene Wenger. It sort of feels like Liverpool have just said, let's just merge all that together over one summer and have some sort of transition between them, but transition at the same time as we're actually transitioning to a French Revolution of our own. Very strange. One of those things that we're talking about, this explosion of modern football, and this to me feels like 10 years before. It feels very dated, I think, at this point. I do think it was radical. I think we know that it wasn't something that tended to happen. I do think Liverpool started to look a little bit more positive's the wrong word, considering they finished third the year before, but maybe a little bit more continental, shall we say?
You can see what they're trying to do. Yeah,
you can see what is trying to happen.
Fashionable, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
fashionable, but you mentioned the word radical there. I think that in terms of mentioning the word radical with French, this is the strangest decision since the terror, because co-manage, how can that work? What is that? Who are the players to listen to? Who's the final decision maker? What if they, even who names a team every week? Do they take it in turns? Let's be honest. This is, look, we don't actually have the heart to sack you, Roy. So here's a badge and a Janny's bucket and some keys. Go and sit in the corner until you get fed up, and then you can quit, and then it's not our fault, which is cowardly. If you want to make the change, you make the change.
Yeah,
but it's one of those things. I can imagine on a whiteboard looks perfect, David. You know what I mean? That's right. Okay, we don't want to make that step too far, and this boot room heritage that is going back decades now. That's another thing that there's no way they're ripping that up in one go. So it's, do a season. Just show this guy the rope, show this guy what Liverpool's all about, because we know we need to make that break. There's no one else left in that boot room that we can, realistically call upon. That's not how football's going anyway. It looks French, it sounds French. We need to make that jump. However, we're very, very well aware of our heritage, and I absolutely can see how that works in some kind of boardroom meeting, but not with human beings, not with very proud and professional human beings. I just think there's too much fucking about there, and it lasted a few months. And listen, it was the right thing for Liverpool to do, because I think it's fair to say it'll turn out all right for them.
Houllier, it was a good appointment.
Yeah, maybe not getting exactly where they wanted to go, but I think it did move them on as a club, especially competing in Europe in the 21st century for sure. But I can well understand why it was difficult to just cut that thing completely.
I can understand it, but again, it's that fine line between being mindful of your past and wanting to continue things that served you well, and then feeling like you can't ever shed your past and you're kind of suffocated by it a little bit. And I think, like I said, the Arsenal transition was dealt with really well, whether it was intentional or not, with the whole Bruce Yorke interim, or not interim, but intervening period. We'll never really know, but I do think Liverpool are like, what should we be doing as Liverpool right now, rather than what do we need to do to get to the top. The one thing I would say, I know we spoke about Arsenal here, but they're still scoring a decent amount of goals. Like they get 70 goals last season and 70 goals this season, but the one thing that's letting them down in this season in particular, we're going to come on to, is their defence. Defence is appalling. So that was not really an issue, which you might associate with the kind of stuffier approach that there was before. But Houllier certainly needs to tighten up the defence going into the season after, which he does. But yeah, that's the big thing that's going to knock him down this season.
David, across Stanley Park, Walter Smith turns up, exhausted, no doubt, by a long period in charge of Rangers and all the stress that entails, especially the last 2 years of his reign and the disappointment at the end of 97-98. A hint that was him done, understandably, taking a good rest from football. That lasted a few weeks, and the Everton job kind of popped up. They didn't mess about that summer, did they, Everton? I mean, Championship managers, very own Ibrahima Bakayoko, Olivier Decor, Steve Simonson, maybe the less said about that, the better. Like they get David Unsworth back that season, did they? John Collins, I think, coming in from Monaco. So there's money spent.
Alex Niarco,
well, indeed,
was another big money signing. Yeah,
there'll be something in the winter that kind of pulls the rug under all of that kind of structure, I suppose, which is when Duncan Ferguson gets sold without Walter really knowing anything about it. But they're at least looking the part initially.
Yeah, I mean, I think what Walter is sold turns out not to be what he experiences when he's down there. And it's a tough period for him. But that summer, it looked as though that they were going to back him. There's some money being spent there. These guys they're in the kind of £4 to £8 million range. Collins, I thought, he did a good World Cup for Scotland. Not many could say that. He'd been playing abroad, obviously, in France. And I thought he would be absolutely suited to the Premier League. Bakayoko, there was not one Championship manager player out there who wasn't super excited to see Ibrahima Bakayoko, who Everton got a lot cheaper than the...
Yeah, he came in the following season. Apologies. It's
right. Standard
that season, but yeah.
Standard 10.5 million standard Championship manager fee. But they looked as though that Walter had an idea and had a plan of what he wanted to do. I think the issue is, as we will see, some of the players don't work out, right? Some of the players are very, very poor, and there's no getting away from that, and that's pretty difficult to do. And secondly, I think the tumult off the field begins to affect it. Now, I would argue this spell, Martin, makes Walter Smith a better manager. And I think that our club, Scotland national team, and then our club reap the benefit of this longer term with what he does for the Scotland national team and then what he does in his second spell at Rangers. But it's difficult almost from the start. This summer is like the calm before the storm for him. And I think that Walter sees the Everton job as a chance to take them up the way. I don't think he's coming into it thinking it's going to be grim relegation battles. I think he sees this as an opportunity because again, we're not that long removed from Everton being, a contender, 5-6 years really, since that has completely fallen away. I think he sees it as a fallen giant, kind of like Rangers were when he entered with Graham Souness. And he's given decent money to spend. It's not used particularly wisely, if we're being honest. And from there, everything, off the field becomes very, very tricky. Finances become very, very tricky. As staggering as it is to say that about an English Premier League club at any point, but it's true. The finances become a huge issue. And suddenly, Martin, this job about, oh, great, I've got an opportunity to build something becomes I am a firefighter and I'm going to have to constantly firefight in my entire time here. I'm not sure it would have been the most enjoyable spell of Walter's career, but I do think that crucible, that cauldron actually improves him as a manager. And he was a very good manager before that, but I think it actually takes something, and I think you see it in his later job, because he will have to do a lot of firefighting in his second spell at Rangers when the finances were in a perilous state. And I think this spell really cuts him out for it. But my goodness, it was a painful education.
Yeah, Bakayoko didn't work out, obviously, just that one season, this season, before going back to France. But Marco Materazzi's another one, Adam. There's a sprinkling of quality in signings that kind of make sense, but it's a club that just isn't being run properly. And for all the best management in the world, sometimes you can't turn around that momentum, reverse momentum, as it may be.
No, I think we know he had some success in the later couple of seasons at Rangers with some Italian players. So I wonder how much he had a hand in that Materazzi one. We don't know. I mean, David will tell you.
Perugia again.
Yeah. David will tell you it's not really changed too much probably in 20 years. But again, the biggest problem here is scoring goals for Everton. It's I think 6 is our top, Kevin Campbell, in the Premier League this season. They don't break the 50 goals barrier.
Several times this season, Everton are operating with 6 centre backs in the side. The back three, the two. It's so well. The back three, the 2 wing backs, and one of the midfielders will be a centre back. Now, obviously, that should provide you with solidity, but in terms of going forward, it's going to limit you, and it really isn't until a couple of signings late in the season that they sort of unlock that. But 6 centre backs, yes, and a goalkeeper. I mean, that you can't argue with that, can you?
Some classic Walter Nacho.
Yeah. Plenty still to talk about. We'll take another break and we'll wrap it all up for the summer of 1998. Welcome back to the summer of 98 and our first episode of 98-99 in the Premier League. We'll go around the houses then, boys, because we've got plenty still to have a wee look at before we finish and start the action properly next week. Spurs. Christian Gross is in place with his ticket. It doesn't really last too long. If it was off peak, they don't really do much either, Adam, which suggests we've made the wrong choice here. Let's see how he goes, and if it is the disaster that it looks as if it might be, then at least we haven't thrown good money after bad on it.
Yeah, but they did, I guess. Everson had a pretty good season this season. He'd obviously just a couple of years before, wasn't it? He came in and he hadn't had the best of times. So this season and the season after are his best two for me with them. But yeah, it's not going to work. Their squads kind of reminds me a little bit of Liverpool squad in a way, a couple of rungs below it, maybe, but just a bit like we're not really sure what we're trying to do here. We've got things that might work and might make sense. Like you've got Ginola on one side, Stephen Carr on the other side, in terms of contributions or wide play, but yeah, I don't know. It just feels basically like the manager. I think it feels like there's big gaps that I'm not sure how many Stefan Everson goals would solve. And again,
Tottenham's issue when you look at the squad, and Adam just mentioned there, is that it's sort of like when you watch a film and it's full of bit part actors from other better films. And you go, I know his face, and you actually end up not seeing the film because you're on IMDb. Just a shout at that, going through this squad. They've got Sheffield Wednesday's Roger Nielsen. They've got Newcastle's Will Fox. They've got Newcastle's Les Ferdinand. They've got Crystal Palace's Chris Armstrong in there. They've got Newcastle's David Ginola. They've got Liverpool and Wimbledon's John Scales. They've got QPR's Andy Sinton. That's their transfer policy. If we go to clubs who are doing well or are a big club and we get a player, by definition, they must be good because they've been at this club and they repeat it so often. And sometimes they get something out of it, but there's very little in there that you would quantifiably call Tottenham, except Darren Anderton, who is unfortunately at this point caught up in the injury issues which Spurs caused, incidentally, but that will haunt his time at Spurs. So to me, it's like they're trying to make a quilt with a lot of offcuts.
I'm
But
really
the point I'm making, though.
I'm really disappointed you didn't finish that with Arsenal's Sol Campbell there, by the way. Just
I don't want threats coming through the post. No, I think Tottenham fans are already on edge as we record this.
But I hope you understood the point I was making. They don't do anything this summer.
No,
which means they don't trust the manager.
Don't have faith in the manager. No.
In the winter, Stefan Freud comes in and Tim Sherwood, your friend and mine, David,
Love
comes
him
in from Blackburn into the middle of the park. Now, we'll get to it. Those are not Christian Gross signings. Those are the signings of a very different manager who will be in place by the time we get there. So I think the writing, bless him for Christian Gross, was very much on the wall. Aston Villa with that Dwight Yorke money, Davy. Paul Merson in from Borough. Alan Thompson from the relegated Bolton. Those are kind of sensible signings. Merson would have a great time there at Villa, no?
Yeah, absolutely. He'd been good at Middlesbrough. Interestingly enough, a couple of months ago, I saw him talk about this, and he says he feels bad because Middlesbrough was the only club he went to for money. But equally, he did deliver for them. He didn't shortchange them, but he said himself, obviously with Middlesbrough's travails, and then Villa, the opportunity to go there was huge. I thought it was a terrific signing. I thought Alan Thompson was a very good signing because he had impressed in that Bolton side. And he, as our team found to its cost on occasion, he had a very good left foot. And they look very Villa signings, don't they? Both of those. They look very sort of the type of guys that will go in there, and there was a sort of real British core to it. Throughout the season, there's some other signings as well that they'll bring in. They'll bring in Steve Watson from Newcastle, who I'd always thought had been an effective player. They'll bring in Dion Dublin, and they'll bring in Steve Stone. And they do fit, don't they? They are of a piece, these signings. Yeah, you can see what they're doing. Chelsea is super glamorous. Aston Villa is not. Chelsea is, going out to Nobu for a meal, and Aston Villa are going out to a very British establishment and having steak and kidney pie. But you can
it's a traveller's rest, David.
It is. Look, it's a beef eater, but you can see how it's supposed to work, and you can see why it will work. So there's nothing wrong with that. They had a very, very conscious idea, but there's talent in that side, and Merson has that, and there's goal scoring talent in that side. It's a good squad.
I never liked Steve Stone. Just putting that out there.
Oh no!
Oh no!
It's one of those. That's the reaction I was expecting, because it's one of those quaint English. Here's what we think a wide player in England should be, and it's miles below the actual fact. I was really surprised that there was no 6 million. Yeah,
Steve Stone.
Not for me.
He was an England international.
Nah, kinda.
Yeah, I liked him. Maybe not by this time, right enough. A few quick hits, boys, conscious of time. Newcastle, Adam. Didi Hamann stays for a year. Nobby Solano, little more than that. And Stefan Givars, very much less than. I mean, who would pick him up? Who would pick him up?
Yeah.
And put Newcastle out their misery for scoring the only player in that France squad who didn't look any good whatsoever. Signed before the World Cup, I think, to be fair. Some interesting bits and pieces going on in Newcastle, I guess. Faustino Sprilia, bless him, away back to Parma.
He was, yeah. He burned bright. Good signings, I think. Certainly going into continuing into the January as well, but I think they're adding a bit of firepower that they probably needed with quite a few of the players leaving. Maybe some that they needed a couple of years before, if we're being honest. But yeah, I thought it's a mixed bag for sure. But you've got Didi Hamann, you've got Solano, Ferguson, who at the time I was pretty confident would be a really good signing for Newcastle, if I'm honest. And then Louis Saha and Didier Domi coming in the summer. I think both had Domi had a better spell. Obviously, Saha was just alone, wasn't he? But
he was alone. I guarantee that I had, and I guarantee a lot of the viewers had forgotten Louis Saha at Newcastle.
No,
he goes on to have a wonderful PL career.
He does, and I don't think again when he came there, I thought that was one of those signings. Like, okay, I can see what they're trying to do. Domi, I think had a decent spell, quite a few years there. I think Newcastle fans would remember him as a decent player. So yeah, a bit of a mixed bag, but there's players in there that I thought would do a little bit better, Saha and Duncan Ferguson, and there's players in there that I think will be really fondly remembered. Solano probably being the pick of the bunch, if we're honest. So no, not a terrible window overall.
Can I just highlight, when we do the research for these shows, sometimes things amuse us that are a bit silly. They signed a player from Greece who went by the name of Georgios Georgiadis, which is the most Greek-sounding thing I've ever heard in my life, from Panathinaikos, and unfortunately didn't go on to the heights of major success. But what a wonderful name to get on your kit at that point.
Presumably fell in love with a young girl called Helenios, just to tip it all off. Couple other bits and pieces, I guess, maybe worth pointing out. Forest lose Kevin Campbell, spend quite a lot of money on a 19-year-old Nigel Quashie. Neil Shipley's in there as well, Dougie Friedman, maybe not going to be enough. Blackburn, who had a good season, lest it be forgotten, last year, tried to go back to their old ways, I guess, and kind of spending big to, actually, we might still be in with a shout of doing this kind of thing. We maybe it wasn't just that one-off. And Kevin Davies, one of the bigger signings that they make, it's not going to turn out well, sadly, for Blackburn.
No, Blackburn now are in. They still have a few quid, by the way, because as you mentioned, there's some big money is put down, but they seem a side at a time so quickly, don't they? They seem like 1995's Blackburn Rovers so quickly, and I think that they still had the spending power that meant you had to respect them. But it was they don't have access to the rung of players that they had before. And I think that therefore they are, okay, well, we'll go to the next rung and we're not really attractive there either. And they go to the next rung and you see that. But clubs also know they've got money, so they end up overpaying for guys from the second or third drawer.
Yeah.
And they'll struggle, both will. Middlesbrough appear to have learnt their lessons. They're back up. They're not chasing Brazilian superstar strikers and kind of faded continental talents. It's Gary Pallister coming back. It's Colin Cooper. It's just a bit of nous and experience. And right, let's be a bit more gradual in our build and sensible policy, Adam, for a sensible Britain.
Yes, that is one way of putting it. I think they still have that sort of cosmopolitanness. Am I going with that? That doesn't feel like a word, but I'm going to go for it. With obviously Hamilton Ricard and Mikael Beck and those type of guys in the squad. But yeah, I think, all joking aside, I think that was some much needed solidity. Some players that certainly in Pallister's case had been over the course at the top end of the league and can come in and give them just that little bit of leadership in there, and they go on to have a very good consolidating season in the league.
West Ham, Davey, look like they're just very typical Redknapp, I guess. Looks a bit Brexit. Neil Ruddock comes back. Ian Wright gets brought in. In the winter, they bring in Di Canio and Marc-Vivien Foé. They have a very, very good season. He's just blending characters together. They're going to have a jolly old time there.
He knows what he's doing. I mean, it really is that simple. And I think, in the freedom of this market, where you could get things wrong with it being a 5-year catastrophe that the guy was going to stay on the books. Back then, players moved on frequently. If it didn't work out, they went somewhere else because wages weren't often quite as inhibitive as they have become over the years. So, yeah, I mean, Di Canio, obviously, club legend, goes into that particular status. But again, I just, there was a solidity. Plus, people are now starting to talk, Martin, about this West Ham Academy and what it's going to bring through. That's what people are starting to talk about. And I mean, Ferguson, famously was always trying to get, I'll take Cole or I'll take Carrick or I'll take Ferdinand. In the end, he pursued them, got them eventually.
Mm-hmm.
Indeed. I mean, Wim Jonk turned up at Sheffield Wednesday. Always lovely to see Wim kicking about, for sure. Leeds not doing a hell of a lot, but like Eric Baca and players like that, Adam. Maybe all is not well there with their manager. Doing well, but maybe wanting to get back to London. Where on earth could George Graham end up in London? We will find out in due course. Charity Shield, Arsenal versus Manchester United. It's 3-0 to Arsenal. They're very, very comfortable. It looks as if it's just picking up where it left off. Roy Keane's back, asked Patrick Vieira, and there's one tackle in particular that was, let's say, crunching, but maybe best not to read too much into the result of the Charity Shield, but it's clear it's going to be those two at it all season, with some Chelsea thrown in for good measure. I've enjoyed the trip back to 1998, gentlemen. Thank you, Adam.
Thank you. Yeah, pleasure.
Cheers, David.
A pleasure as always, mate.
Strap yourself in. It's going to be one for the ages. Until next time, bye for now.